Hey everybody, I wanted to do this video at this first threshold on the journey, the threshold of blessing. This is the time when we move from our familiar story, when the scaffolding, the structures that we're so used to thinking are going to keep us safe and secure seem to be collapsing or losing their legitimacy. We're moving into the field of openness. This is where we begin to practice opening our mind, our hearts, and our wills, beginning to lean into a new story. So as we cross this first threshold, I wanted to draw our attention to something we encounter, really a friend and a challenge that we encounter at every threshold on the journey. This first threshold, we will encounter this crossing over, letting go of a story, a familiar, seemingly safe story, into risking a new story. We're going to encounter grief, a friend and an ally on the way. And we move to cross the second threshold that we'll get to, the threshold of the threshold of impasse, when we're letting go of all of our best efforts to lean into the biggest possible mystery of the universe, where the alchemical transformation really takes place. That's a grief threshold as well. And then letting go of that to bring our gifts into the world, the third threshold, will involve grief as well. So I wanted to just pause for a few moments. This is a little bit longer of a video. There are resources, as you can see, on the resource section that talk about grief and an introduction to thresholds and why grief is important. But I wanted to offer some more guidance here. Whenever I work with people who are grieving, and I need to say that as leaders who are stepping into purpose, their purpose in this time of disruption, we need to become apprentices of grief. We need to know how to walk with people and hold the space for people when they're grieving. I remember Denise Levertov's poem, "To Speak of Sorrow," works upon it, moves it from its crouched place, barring the way to and from the soul's hall. So we are called as leaders to create a space for people to speak of their sorrow in this time of transition, transformation. So when I work with people who are grieving, one of the first questions I sometimes get is grief about losing someone we love, a loved one, or perhaps a pet? And I just want to say that it's that. Yes, of course it's that. It's more of that, more than that. I am really influenced by the teaching of Francis Weller, who wrote a book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, and also my mentor, Carolyn Baker, who's written a lot about grief and also about collapse and this kind of planetary initiation and transition that we're all encountering. You can say hi to my dog, Chai, in the background there. I don't think he's grieving very much. He's just enjoying eating the grass or whatever he's doing. So Francis talks about the 5 gateways of grief. And I think it's really important that we kind of make space in our minds and hearts for all this. I really recommend Francis's book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow. But anyway, Francis's 5 gateways of grief. Let me speak to those. The first is, the first gate: everything we love, we will lose. Everything we love, we'll lose. Every lover, every parent, every child, every pet, every career, everything I've ever created, my health, my life. So when we're able to metabolize this, it can keep our hearts open and malleable or soft, and we're less likely to take anything for granted. We're more likely to be grateful for this moment that we have to live. This understanding of this first gateway of grief compels us to appreciate every relationship and everyone and everything. Who doesn't love the feeling of being in love? Who doesn't love to love and be loved? And yet, again, anyone and anything we love, we'll lose. I love the teachings of Parker Palmer. He's a Quaker writer. Perhaps you're familiar with him. He speaks of I think to quote from his book, Healing the Heart of Democracy, Parker says that life will break your heart. That's what life does. Being human, our hearts will be broken. Parker counsels, if your heart is not exercised, it will be broken into, or shattered really, into judgment and cynicism and hate and reactivity. But if your heart is exercised over time, it can be broken open to love. And so this is what we're doing. We're beginning to exercise our heart as we let go of a story that's too small for our hearts or our soul's longing into a new story. We're exercising our capacity for our hearts to be broken. And some people have said the only heart worth having is a broken heart. I think our hearts are being broken. And that's what transformation is about. I love Leonard Cohen's phrase in that song Anthem. There is a crack in everything. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So the first gateway of grief is everything we love, we will lose. The second gateway is the places in us and around us that have not known love. There are parts of us which we are ashamed or embarrassed of, and that we have all have experience that we view as defective, we try to hide from the world. Whenever any part of us is denied, we're living in loss. For some people, it may be sexual orientation or gender identity. For others, it's some kind of addiction. For others, it may be their anger or fear that we try to keep hidden. In this culture, it's more acceptable it's less acceptable for women to show their anger and their fear, and it's more acceptable for men to show their anger or fear. What is that? We need to grieve that. As children, we may also have had to send away what Carl Jung called the bright shadow, or the parts of us that are creative and humorous and gifted or compassionate. So gateway 2, according to Francis, is the places that have not known love. Just to grieve and to be compassionate to those places in us that have not known love. The third gateway is the sorrows of the world. Here we are. Here we are. This is one of the reasons why you're here in this circle, in this course, stepping into your capacity to be a purposeful leader in this time of great disruption. You're here because you've touched into the grief of our planet. You're here because you sense this collective grief that's all around us. These days, I don't think we need to say much about this because it seems like everybody is leaning into this. I've been on many Zoom conversations, and this is right in front of us now, isn't it? And we need to allow those tears to come. I've been thinking of, my wife's a psychologist, and she's a trauma therapist, actually, and she talks about titration. This interesting thing when she's helping people who've been traumatized to kind of lean in a little bit to the trauma, to feel it in your body, but not too much, then step back from it. And lean in to tolerate it a little bit and notice what's going on in your body and step back from it. And I think that's the same way with this overwhelming sort of planetary grief that we're experiencing. We're only human, right? We're only human, and so we're going to be anxious. We're going to get fearful. We're going to be in fight, flight, or freeze. That's kind of the way we're wired. So we notice it, we grieve it, then we come back to find our centeredness, right? This is the task of a leader, to kind of titrate that grief, not to get overwhelmed by the grief, but to feel it enough to remember, yeah, I'm only human, and then to dip into your practices that can sustain you along the way. The third gateway that Francis mentions is the grief of what we expected and didn't get. What we expected and didn't get. This includes many things that we don't even consciously know that we don't have. So I ask you, what would it have been like if you have been born into Think of that. What would it have been like if you were born into a different context, a different world? What would all of that have been like for you? One of the major kind of wounds or griefs that I encounter as I walk through this world is that so many people are just feeling empty. I think of industrial civilization as perpetual emptiness machine. You know, there's always want something more. There's this kind of insatiable thinking that something more is needed for us to be complete. Many of us in this culture are really emotionally and even spiritually at death's door because they feel so vacuous, so empty. We'll get to that as we move through our journey together. And the reality, the truth, the beauty is really that nothing can really fill this emptiness except a sense of connection, that we're not separate. Remember, we're moving from the story of separation into a larger story. Nothing can fill that emptiness except that knowing that you know that you know that you know that we are one, that we are connected to each other, we're connected to this beautiful creation, we're connected to however you conceive of the divine or that largest beautiful reality in which we are all held. Gateway 5, Francis draws our attention to Gateway 5, which is ancestral grief. Boy, my dog is eating a lot of grass. Hey, Chai, stop eating grass. That can't be good for him. Anyways, Gateway 5 is ancestral grief. One of the reasons why this is important is that many of us come from craziness, really. Abusive families. Many of us come from dysfunctional families, and we have ancestors. I have a grandfather who was very abusive, and I think it constricted my own father's heart. So my father was not really able to kind of share his emotions, you know, with me as his son. I recently had a conversation with my own son where I said, you know, his name is Nathaniel. I said, Nathaniel, you know, I want that kind of epigenetic dysfunction to stop here. And so I want you to know that I love you. You know, my father didn't know how to do that. His father didn't know how to do that, but I want that to stop here. And I want you to know that I love you. I love the fact that you're my son and who you are. Just looking. Another gateway of grief is, how do I say this? It has to do with thinking of our own life and how we've moved through this world and the regrets we have of how we actually may have done harm to ourselves or to those we love or to the planet. You know, we're all, I guess, culpable, you know, in this story of separation. And we've all contributed to the symptoms of that story of separation. And so it's a matter of getting in touch with that and being compassionate. I love the Buddhist teaching that there are two wings of compassion. The first wing is noticing what's there. And so if there's remorse or regret or feeling of, I don't know, shame, to put your hand on that, to notice that kind of interior feeling or thought, and then to treat it. The second wing is to treat it with compassion. You know, I'm only human. I'm only human. Sometimes I feel like the divine is saying to me, you know, Terry, you know, I know it's hard being human. And so be kind to yourself, be gentle to yourself, be compassionate. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of pause at this place on the path to open up this discussion, this little teaching on grief. I hope you can access some of the material that's on the website. There's more on the blog. Each week we'll be putting more material on the blog. And if you can access Francis Weller's work, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, I really recommend it. Thanks for listening to this little teaching about grief. We'll see you soon.